Families are, I think, more than a little and appropriately upset about some of the judge's statements. First of all, his comment that there's no evidence of any touching seemed to completely ignore the defendant's own words on the internet. Those were his words, not somebody else's words, that he did in fact touch these people. He's also concerned about what they said about, what the judge said about the prosecutor not telling the judge that these people were going to speak. If you read the pre-sentence report submitted by the U.S. Attorney, she clearly said that the parents were planning on speaking at that hearing. So I didn't understand his reprimand to the U.S. Attorney, who families have a lot of faith in. The U.S. Attorney, Homeland Security were really outstanding in this case. He made a comment about not understanding why they went to West Bloomfield. It is, in my experience at least, the very first time I've ever heard anyone criticize Homeland Security and local police for cooperating with one another. And the parents of these children have been very appreciative of both Homeland Security and the U.S. Attorney's office. In terms of whether or not this was an appropriate sentence or not an appropriate sentence, the parents could not disagree more with this judge. This was an agreed to sentence. This person could have spent more than 20 years in prison. It came down to 10. We believe that was a fair outcome.
Are the parents happy with the 10-year sentence? Or?
Parents are grateful to put this part behind them.
And what's the next part?
Well, the next part is to try and find out what really happened here and why it happened. You heard that in the victim impact statements. They want to know from the JCC what happened, why it happened, and that will be the next step going forward. Now, I will tell you that I have some degree of confidence that the JCC just may do the right thing here. They may come forward with this information. They may decide to compensate the children and make sure that they get the counseling, compensated in the way that is appropriate. And I think most importantly, you heard one of the parents talk about it's time that we stopped shaming the victims. These parents feel they must remain secret. They can't let their children's names out. Why? If they were hit by a drunk driver, their names would be on your screens and in the news all the time. There'd be no shame connected. But what are the parents worried about here? What do we see happening all the time in these cases? Other parents, other children begin to look at the victims in different ways. They treat them in different ways. Suddenly a parent's worried, well, we don't know what happened with that child, and that child may become a sexual predator himself. And so the children are shunned. It's time that we did something to stop that.
Parents accuse the JCC of ignoring complaints and inadvertently putting their children in danger. What do you
I only disagree about the inadvertent. They had complaints. We don't know all the details, but they had clear complaints about this person. They fired 3 people for not doing something about that. That's all we really know, but that's not inadvertent. You know, my firm's handled a lot of these cases, and this is exactly the pattern that we see in case after case. People know that something is wrong and decide, for reasons that are difficult to understand with any hindsight, to do nothing about it.
Are you going to go after the JCC?
We will take appropriate action against anybody who has been responsible for what happened to these children.
Any preliminary indication of if they're willing to take responsibility for this situation?
Well, I have only spoken with their attorney, and we will see. It's not just taking responsibility, though, Alan. It's important that they step forward and reveal all that's out there, all that they have, everything that they've done that tells us and lets the parents know what happened. These parents are not just interested in a financial outcome here. They're interested in knowing what happened, being able to do what they need to do to protect their children.
You know, Is this a cover-up?
Thus far.
It was a cover-up.
Well, thus far. I mean, there's been no revealing to the parents of what happened. As a matter of fact, we asked, we were told, that's not important right now. Now, will there be a cover-up? Look, you know, I think anybody who knows the JCC as an institution has got to be impressed with the JCC. Will they do the right thing in this case? We're going to see.
How many parents are you representing here?
3.
And what's the global sort of the victim count that you see? I mean, is it beyond 3?
It's difficult to know, Alan. One of the things that you know about us is we don't get involved during the criminal case. We want the criminal process to run without anybody saying, "Oh, this is really just a process."
Is the criminal case continuing after
No,
this?
now it's done. So now we will complete our investigation. Are there other victims out there? I don't know the answer to that question. I know that it would be inconsistent with everything that we've seen, that it would only be this one
Do
time.
you think
it would only
goes
be
beyond
these
the
3.
Jewish Community Center with him?
It would be.
Is that something you would look at?
We'll look at it. I don't know that we'll find it. I mean, part of the problem is this is on the dark web. This is not easy stuff to research.
On that
Wouldn't
note,
the
parents were
wouldn't the
talking
feds
about-
though have done forensic? I mean, they would have looked at his computer. They would have turned this guy inside out.
And the evidence is that he had quite a few pictures of children on his computer, where they came from, how many of those he took, other issues. Look, they had him. One of the things that the feds always have an issue with is, where do you spend your resources? There was no question that they had him and were going to be able to get likely to be able to get a guilty verdict on these cases. How far they went after that, I don't know. You've got to be very impressed, however, with the work that Homeland Security did on these cases.
Can you talk about what the parents said in court? We obviously weren't able to bring cameras in there, but they really spoke from the heart about the impact this has had on their lives, their families, their children. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think they did it far more eloquently than I did. You don't go through a process like this without being deeply impacted. And you know, while the law may say that the compensation and the lawsuits can only be brought on behalf of the child, there's not a member of these families that haven't been impacted, whether they're brothers or sisters, whether they're the parents, and even the grandparents. This deeply affects everyone. And in a way, in these cases, far more than most, because there's a need, or a perceived need, to be silent. And I think most psychologists will tell you that when you have to be silent, when you have to keep a secret, you carry shame. And they have nothing to be ashamed of, and yet they have to carry this shame.
These kids' faces, their names, they're out there. I mean, the parents spoke about this. This will be never ending for them.
You're right. It will be never ending for them.